Now you got a new flagship product that you're pushing. You already made the proof of concept and you're working on getting the feature length made of it. And that's the Duppy Man's Walk, which I reviewed. And I highly encourage people to go back and check out my review. And when they get the opportunity to see it, to check it out for themselves. Now, there's quite a story that goes with the making of this thing. So please share that with the audience because I found it interesting. I bet they will too.
So the Duppy Man is it's kind of like our first full-throated foray into dialogue and visuals. You know what I mean? It's a very rich story with kind of a cloverleaf structure where we go back and forth between the past and the present to tell the story of a family reclaiming a lost homestead in the South Georgia swamp. And with it comes the remnants of the tragedy and violence that happened there before, and it's embodied by the Duppy Man. The feature script has been done since 2017. We actually went out into the world and shopped it for a while with development companies. A couple of companies were interested, but they just couldn't wrap their minds around what these rural Southern characters should look and feel like in tone. It was written as authentically as it could, and you got a chance to meet my cousin, so that character that she plays, that ain't a character. That's cousin. You know what I mean? But when you see the words on paper, it's a very fine line, especially when you're talking to development execs that don't necessarily come from the same backgrounds, the same part of the country, or the same type of life experience. It was a fine line between it being Amos and Andy and being what we created it to be. And that was the challenge that we got caught with first. And after about a year of that, I just said to myself, man, it'll take me less time to go out and make something than it will for me to try to get here and explain to you why it's important. So we did. My mother has some acreage in South Georgia, and the story actually all takes place there. My mother was in the military. She retired to this little town in South Georgia where her family has been for generations. And I didn't understand it. I was like, you've been around the world a couple different times. Why in the world you choose this little podunk in Georgia? She explained, because this is where our family's roots are. So I finally get a chance to come up and see it for the first time. And it's this big, sprawling property filled with like 100-year-old cypress trees and Spanish. Like, it was amazing, blew my mind. But everywhere I went on the property, I felt like people were watching me and speaking to me. And it kind of creeped me out, but it was more familial and familiar than it was creepy. So I started kind of just letting it work on me, and then spent a couple of days there, came back to in Atlanta, and I couldn't get the story out of my head. So I sat down and I wrote it. And the story is fictitious, but it's something that happened in that part of the country to countless families. There's a little bit of history thrown in that helps set the stage for like actual history, to help set the stage for the fictional narrative we tell. But the Duppy Man's Walk is our first real shot at doing something that we think is important. The feature, we're going to get it off the ground here eventually, but the short itself is your introduction to this world. And what we did that I thought was smart, because it was my idea, we didn't give you anything from the feature. In the feature, there's a line where one cousin is talking to another about why their brother isn't there. So the question is, why isn't our cousin here for this family gathering that's important after we're reclaiming this land after 100 years? And the answer was, he doesn't come out here anymore because he had a bad experience. So what we did is we took his story and told that as the introduction to the world, the myth, and the mythology, rather than giving you a compressed version of the feature.
Oh, so that's how that fits into the greater scheme of things. So I
Yeah.
saw why he doesn't want to go out there anymore.
Yes,
And he
yes.
did have a bad experience. He really
Yes, he did.
did.
Yes, he did.
And well, what
But
kind of budget did you have for this thing? Because it looked good.
well, I mean, we spent some money now. We did a fundraising course, friends and family, and we were able to come up with about 17 grand that way. And then production partners and myself, we came up with all the other stuff for finishing and post. But the budget in total, if you include festival entries, was like 38 grand. And the thing that made it expensive was everybody traveled from Atlanta 4 hours to the swamp. We shot this in the Okefenokee region, some in the swamp itself, but mostly on my mom's land. But Waycross, Georgia is probably 4 hours away from Atlanta. We traveled everybody, 25 members of cast and crew, put them up in Airbnbs. Everybody got union rates and per diem. It was during COVID as well. It was the back end of COVID. So some of the COVID restrictions had been lifted, but this was like 2021, 2022 we did this, I think. So it cost some money to do, but we really believed in the project, and we knew that once people see the proof of concept, it will bring a relevance to the script into the production plan for the feature when they see it in a way that shows them why this is important.
The actors that you got to play in it, they did a good job. Like your cousin you mentioned, she brought a unique voice to the screen and one that should be featured more. When you're talking about the people that you're pitching it to, not really understanding how this fits into basically their worldview. That strikes me as a kind of cultural chauvinism on their part. This isn't something I know. I don't know what to do with it, and I'm not going to try that hard either. It's that
Right.
aversion to new ideas we were talking about earlier, because there's all kinds of interesting stories all over the world and in all these different little subcultures. And I'm originally from the South, mostly Tennessee, but I went to officer school in Fort Benning, Georgia, and now I live in Florida. I was stationed in Louisiana. There are different cultures from all over the place. And I guess they're comfortable with stereotyping and making fun of Cajuns. They're fine with that. But if you want to
Bobby
have
Boucher.
some Bobby Boucher, there you go. But they don't really know what to do with other folks. That's unfortunate. Again, it's that lack of imagination and that lack of willingness to learn about other people and relate to them. And it stinks.
My experience has been that they don't necessarily value the voices because they look at it as product, right? And so what they want to do is reach the largest number of potential screens. And to do that, they think that they need to curate whose voices get magnified. And that's what I kind of got from my experience with it is, oh, we really love the story, but how is this going to play in Chicago or to predominantly white audiences in the Pacific Northwest?
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, pretty good because Duppy Man's Walk is screened in all those places. But if you don't find value in the product that you would potentially produce, you don't spend a lot of time putting money into the development of it. That was
Yeah.
my takeaway from it. The cultural chauvinism, your words, very good words. I don't want to use them,
No,
not
they're
because I
mine.
don't
They're
believe
mine.
them. You know, that's the way it is. Like the South has a rich storytelling tradition. The South has the greatest storytellers that ever lived. A lot of them. I mean, first of all, Baltimore is below the Mason-Dixon, so technically Edgar Allan Poe was a Southerner. You know what I'm saying? Tennessee Williams, Alice Walker, you know, everybody says Mark Twain, but Mark Twain, you know, the rich storytelling tradition. But how often do we actually see ourselves on the big screen or our stories on the big screen?
Yeah.
And not like Black Snake Moan or Monsters Ball or The
Waterboy.
Waterboy. One of the films that I loved was Three Billboards Over Ibn, Missouri. You know what I'm talking about?
I've heard of it. I
Francis
didn't see it though.
McDermott. You should check it out because that story could have easily been done in the South. It was small, it was intimate, it was powerful. And we have tons of stories like that here. We just don't have the opportunity to have our voices magnified to big stages like that.
And I think that whoever is not quite buying into your pitches, they're ignoring a few things. Like one, well, True Blood was a big hit and it played
Mhm.
heavy on Louisiana culture. There's one thing that's related to the kind of patois that your cousin portrayed and
Yeah.
the dirty South, very humid environment, kind of uncomfortable setting that your story is set in. But also Beasts of the Southern Wild, the
Yes,
most memorable part of that was the untrained actors that gave some heartrending performances in it. So if it worked there, why won't it work here? You
that's
know?
true.
And that was a big hit amongst film aficionados.
Yeah.
So haven't seen your short and haven't seen Beasts of the Southern Wild, you would definitely make a better movie than what they did. Because I thought like the acting was good, but overall I thought the movie was pretty bad.
Mhm.
But having seen what you put out, no, I would trust you far more
Yeah, I
with a feature
agree.
length. Yes, sir. But Duppy Man, that's another connection to the Caribbean to
Yes.
go along with the John Crow thing. So why don't you familiarize folks with what the Duppy Man is?
In the Caribbean, a duppy is a spirit. A duppy is like saying like a ghost or a phantom or a specter. Somebody might say, ah, there go a duppy. You know what I mean? And a duppy is basically a spirit. They can be malevolent or benevolent, but it's usually a person. It's not a demon or some unhuman spirit or whatever. The duppy is somebody that lived the earth, walked the earth at some point. I'm from Florida originally, but a lot of my family, my father's family is from the Bahamas. My mother's family is from Georgia for the most part, but via Trinidad and Tobago. And when you grow up on the east coast of Florida, everybody you know is Haitian, Jamaican, Bahamian from the island. So as growing up, even probably you, we have a very rich oral storytelling tradition in the South that doesn't get enough attention. And growing up as a child, hearing all these different different stories from these different Caribbean cultures, I kind of fell in love with the mythology of it. Part of the John Crow thing, having its connection to the Caribbean, is the idea that these voices go unheard. The Duppy in our story is actually a former acquaintance of the family, is kind of like the unrecognized witness, because Duppies continue to walk because they have unfinished business. And I don't want to go too far into it, but this guy, one of the themes of the Duppy Man's Walk is some things you can't unsee. And when you can't unsee things, they haunt you. That's kind of the premise of our Duppy Man story. The feature-length version, it actually becomes instrumental to unwinding and revealing to the family its own history. As these people reclaim this property, the connection to the Duppy actually has them walking in the footsteps of the past. And in walking in the footsteps of the past, the younger generation get to learn of their history and of the family on the land. And it's something that that generation had no idea about. So it becomes this coming of age story about a young man learning about his family through a 100-year-old ghost story that he gets caught up in. And that's what the feature really is.
Speaking of the flashback that happens in your short film, I was particularly struck by the strength of the shadows and how the play of the light and the dark in those scenes really comes across strong. And I love how you shot that. So good
I
job.
will pass that on to my partner, Tori. He will love to hear that.
Oh,
Because
yeah.
as the DP, it's all his cameras, it's all his lighting equipment. We had a production designer that helped us with some elements of the visual fabric, but I'll pass it on to Tori, and he'd love to hear it. He's really good at what he does.
Yeah, because lighting on its own can tell a story. Now, you can
Yes,
add to it, but it can tell a story and it can shape a story. So,
absolutely.
yeah, I liked it. And you mentioned again about the South being legendary storytellers. A lot of Southerners are of Scotch-Irish descent, and the Scottish and the Irish are some of the most gifted storytellers, musicians in world history. So, yeah, there's another wrinkle in addition to the ones you already pointed out.
Absolutely.
And Southerners, I mean, I guess statistically, we tend to be pretty violent, and violent people have stories to tell, and they love telling them. We get in a bunch of stuff. There's a reason Florida man is a thing, and
Right.
Cajun man is a thing. We're interesting.
Very true. And it's funny because you were talking about the lighting, but I think, especially in the Duppy Man's Walk the Short, we tried to make the environment as much of a character as we could because it tells a story in itself. You just put the characters in it. But maybe that's why Southerners are such good storytellers, because the landscape, the swamps, the salt air, it all lends to kind of those like visceral and emotional connections that we take in and make memories from. And that's why we thought it was important for the landscape and the swamp itself to play a big role in the story that we told.
I liked it. So I look forward to more of it. Now, are you going to be doing any sort of Indiegogo, Kickstarter? What kind of options for financing are you looking at as you move forward into the future with the Duppy Man?
I have considered stripping. Um, I have
Well, did you
considered
pay
stripping.
attention while you worked at the strip
Um,
club to techniques and
I did, but I mean, until somebody comes up with a fat guy strip club, like I'm out of luck.
big
But
bears?
what?
Eh, there's a lot of
OnlyFans.
money in Atlanta. There's a lot of people who like different things in Atlanta. Just saying. You can use the name. That's free.
That's something to think about. But we will. We're trying. So right now we're getting the business plan all squared away. We wanted to get our festival run done so that as we pitched it, we would have some type of bona fides. And right now we're doing some team building around producers, production designers, because we need to add value to the vision. Because I would be a first-time feature director. That's a gamble in itself. So I'm team building with the other experienced heads so that we're adding some value to the production and it looks like something worth people putting money into. We do plan on doing some crowdfunding as part of a multi-pronged strategy of maybe some equity investment, maybe get on the Film Angels Network. The budget came back at 1.94. We probably think we can do it for less, but we're going to see what we can do. But something like that is coming. I think I'm going to look into Seed and Spark because I heard there's a lot of other types of resources built into the platform for distribution and some other stuff down the line. But for right now, shoring up the team, making sure that the business plan and projections are solid, make sure that we're at the end of our festival run, we're going to start finding ways to release it and get it out into the bloodstream. We think we've proven that we have a market. We just have to prove it to other people. So what we want to do is see what kind of value we can add through a good festival run. And then we're going to try to find somebody to get us legally squared away, and then we'll see what we can do. We really need an experienced financial producer on board, and that's really what we're searching for right now.
Gotcha. Skills and connections. You never have too many of them, right?
Right.
Asking you about Southern Gothic. The material says that influenced Duppy Man's walk.
Southern Gothic is what we decided to call it because it had supernatural elements without being grotesque horror. And Southern Gothic best described to us that homage that we wanted to pay to the oral storytelling tradition of the American South. So Southern Gothic was just some pretty verbiage we put together to make it work, but it does a good job in describing the story as a whole. Southern people basically rehashing their history through the oral storytelling tradition, and that's how we came up with Southern Gothic.
Oh, it's an actual genre. That's why I was curious. All
Oh,
right.
it is.
Let
Win for
me,
us. We didn't know that.
in the production of Duppy Man's Walk and looking at the credits, I didn't see a casting director. Did that just devolve to you? And so it was you finding all the people to do that, or did your friend Tori do it?
Now, Tori basically handles all the technical aspects, and then he hands off all the front end creative and team building to me. So I hooked up with a website called Actors Access. Like, we know a bunch of different types of actors at different levels here in Atlanta. So we asked them, how do you guys get gigs? And we had worked with a few of these companies before when we casted some of the other shorts. I found out very early I could become a SAG signatory for micro budget films under, I think it's like under 50,000, and they give you a set day rate. So when we were looking for talent, we were always looking to work with professionals. With the Duppy Man in particular, and all the other ones, I go to my actor friends, hey, where do I need to go? Oh, Actors Access, oh, here, oh, here. And then we linked up with a few casting agencies that some of the people work with, and we went through about 300 different audition tapes for the Duppy Man, because now everything is basically done via internet. So they'll self-tape. You send them the sides, they'll self-tape, and then they can self-submit. And that's kind of what we did. We found Robert Yata and knew we had a foundation with him. Oh, Tyler Webb as well. Tyler is actually a guy who I got a chance to work with before, so I reached out to him, but he was on there, and everybody else was just actor friends or family. And I was like, you know what? You're not an actor, but you embody this particular thing. So come aboard, let me work with you, I'll pay you. And that's how we cast it up on this one.
So that's another thing to add to your CV, casting director. And you wear many hats. That's all right. Were there any additional anecdotes or trying experiences on the production of making the Duppy Man walks?
Quite a few, actually. I mean, because we had money. One of them is we contracted to have a 1.5-ton grip truck. We were going to pick it up in Atlanta. We were going to drive it down to Waycross. We were going to have it for a certain number of days. On the way, that truck broke down. So we had to come up with a different contractor and get it there on time because our days were limited. And I'm already paying for Airbnbs and all this other stuff. So we ended up with a Sprinter van full of stuff rather than a truck, and we made it work. And it didn't really affect what we were able to capture, but it affected the systems that we had. Stabilizers in particular, we were supposed to have a jib, we were supposed to have dollies, supposed to have steady cams. We ended up with a steady cam, but it was rickety. We had to cut away some shots that were just not stabilized properly. So we just roll with the punches. One thing about working with the idea of guerrilla warfare filmmaking is you find a way to make it happen. And Tori's really good at putting technical assets in the proper places to get the right visual fabric from it. So we didn't have a boat. We had the canoe scene planned out in the script. We had worked through a bunch of different ways to get out on the Little Satilla River. Insurance said, if you're going to put people out here in open water, running water, you need to have a rescue team. You have to have the boat for the scene, and you need to have a rescue team if possible. So we had to get rid of the running water idea. But luckily, right around the corner from my mom's house, when you see that scene in where they're on the canoe on what looks like they're on the bayou or the marsh or whatever, that's actually a little estuary that wraps around a guy's house. So at no point were those people more than 25 yards from shore. And because of it, we didn't have to get the safety team. But one of the guys didn't know how to paddle a canoe. He had never been in a canoe. And if you watch the scene closely, you can see like he's got his hands crisscrossed in like this weird way. And we gave him hell on the set. So this guy, he works as a grip on a lot of shows, and he'll be like 80, 90 feet up on the catwalk hanging lights, but you'd never been in a canoe. He was scared of the canoe. So that was funny. And that was the guy in the green shirt with the dreads, Devin. Also, we had 1 day left, and our booking of the 1800s homestead, the actual location is called Obadiah's Okefenokee in Folkestone, Georgia. That was actually an 1800 homestead. There's a park there that you can go visit as a historical site in Waycross. And we had booked it for 1 day, but we ran over shooting, so we weren't able to use it that day. So the next day we had to figure out how to take our team and get all the coverage that we needed with the limited amount of light that we had. And we decided to break into 2 units. Tori took one off to the homestead. I took the other one to the abandoned turpentine mill. We were able to get the coverages done, and we didn't get what we wanted totally from either because we had to split the cameras and split our assets, but we ended up with something that continued to move the story. And at the abandoned turpentine mill, my mother's grandfather and father actually worked at that turpentine mill before she was born. That little town of Beach, Georgia was probably only like 500 people. So there's a railroad track that goes right through the middle of the town. Turpentine mill on the other, right across the street is the hospital my mother was born in. And it's all still around family land that used to be connected to this church. And when we were setting up to do the scene in the abandoned turpentine mill, we actually had to have the gaffer hack away some overgrowth so we could put lights in a certain place. And he found a funerary wreath and some flowers. And it shut production down for like an hour because we're like, should we continue? Because the whole story that we're talking about is people encroaching on places that they shouldn't have been and catching hell because of it. So, I mean, like production, we were kind of looking at each other and people were looking at me like, Greg, what are we going to do? And I'm sitting here like, we spent too much money to stop now.
None of y'all thought to call a priest or an
Yeah,
archaeologist to come check it out? Y'all are just
but
like, I don't know.
that's
Okay, let's
great.
keep going.
My cousin and I, she got real emotional about it. I was like, well, this is actually maybe why we're here. Maybe the whole Duppy Man thing, the way that land spoke to me, was actually to get us out here one day in this place so we could uncover this thing. So my mom, I think my cousin actually took it back to my mom. I wouldn't have touched it, but we shot the scenes. It was kind of spooky. But then we found out from a family member that it had been put there in like 1964 for
Wow.
somebody else that was in the family, because the mill had been abandoned since like the early 60s. And I think that what we saw wasn't because the person was buried there, but it was put there to commemorate the life that they had spent working there. So nobody was actually buried there.
Okay.
And so we felt good about it after that. But it was spooky. It was kind of spooky. But those are my fondest memories of all of it.
Well, that's pretty cool and ominous and fitting for the production that you were doing. That's
Right.
pretty neat. Well, so long as you prayed over the thing and said, "We wish you well and we honor your memory." Now, please don't curse me. I think you were probably okay. Did you do all that?
I think that the Earth was terraformed by aliens. So I didn't do that, but others did.
That's a whole other conversation.
Right, right. But no, we
And
did,
one,
we did, we did say some words, and we asked. My cousin gave a little blessing, and we were real respectful about how we went about it. But yeah, we when the sun started to get low, we made sure we got our stuff and got the hell out of there.
that is smart. Now, you had mentioned something about when you were on your mother's land, you felt like you're always being watched. Was it a sense of being watched by people, or was it that sense of being around so much nature?
Both, because as a black man, I had never been on that much property that we could say was ours. That in itself bugged me out because everywhere that I went, everywhere that I saw, no matter what I did, this was still ours. And that's a crazy feeling when you grow up in apartments or acre lots, if you're lucky. And now you got, 60, 70 of them. The world, the nature, the trees, the hogs, the deer, the squirrel. And you're just kind of like, I have a place in this. That alone was eerie to begin with. Because, I mean, Like, I don't spend a lot of time in the woods in general, but knowing that all these woods was ours and like it was my responsibility to know what was out there, that was weird. But the other part that I heard speaking to me, it was kind of goes back to the idea that like I belong here, because that as a military brat is something you don't always get either. You know, home is where you make it, but as a military kid, you're moving around all the time, having to make wherever you get sent to home. And the idea that this was gonna be ours for as long as we were alive and maybe generations past, part of that was the reason that I felt like the land was speaking to me. It was kind of like a welcome home, which is where I got the reclamation theme of the Duppy Man from. Our family wasn't on that land, but coming back to that land that my mother had bought for herself and her kids and the generations after, it felt like we were reclaiming something that had been potentially lost. And that's where the story came from.
I think that's a very interesting and illustrative experience you had of the kind of humbling that comes with being connected to the spirit of the land, because we're creatures. Forests are full of creatures. The trees are creatures. The grass are creatures. The squirrels, the coyotes, all that stuff is creatures. And if you grow up in suburban or urban areas and you never get exposed to that, people are missing out on part of the human experience, particularly what those that came before us, they had to learn how to accommodate and live with that nature, because we
Right.
get to dominate a lot of our nature. Now, sometimes nature does this and there ain't nothing we can do about it, but we have a lot of control over it. And nature's not the most comforting thing all the time, because it eats itself constantly, and it'll eat you if it gets a chance. A tree will
Yes,
eat you
sir.
if it can. But understanding your place in everything, like what you were just talking about, it's important to get that perspective. So that's cool. If anybody listening has just lived in like a concrete jungle your whole life, go out to a national park for a couple days. Leave your phone or turn your phone off so
Mhm.
you're not just doom scrolling while surrounded by nature.
Right.
Get that different feeling. It'll teach you something.
It definitely will. And it definitely is humbling, because the first thing I thought about was, good Lord, I bet the First Nations caught hell out here trying, because again, like you said, we get to dominate it, but they had to find synthesis with it. Man, could you imagine? Like, I couldn't. I was just dumbfounded. And then when you put it in a historical perspective, imagine how much we've lost with what we call civilization from, like you said, the human experience. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
it was incredible. And now that place has become a centerpiece of our family, not just my mom's immediate family, but our grandkids, nieces, nephews, uncles, her brothers and sisters. That's the family's homestead now, just not necessarily reclaimed, but from now on, you know what I mean? And we're doing everything we can to preserve it and bring people. It's amazing, bro. It's what she did after giving me the world as a kid was brought me back to a place that she knew as home and showed me how I belong as part of it. And to me, that is what the Duppy Man is about. The family is reclaiming the land, but in doing so, they're also reclaiming that lost history that they lost traveling the world and bouncing from place to place and not knowing the history of their family or what the people went through to preserve it for them. And it's been an enriching experience, her owning that land for everybody in our family.
That's great. I'm sure that means something to her whenever you tell her that kind of thing, because
Mm.
how could it not feel good to help enrich someone else's experience like that? That's awesome. So hopefully her retirement's going well.
Yeah,
Good deal.
she's doing good.